All right, I believe we're live. So we're in Ephesians chapter 5, and we've had several conversations about Ephesians chapter 5. And to orient everybody to the terrain, what I'll try to do is I'll share my screen real quick and we'll look at the passage for just a second. And it says, be therefore followers of God as dear children. And we've talked about what does it mean to be followers of God? What do you mean, dear children? Like in what way, dear children, right? And then walk in love. And we talked about that at length, seeing if we could incorporate elements of 1 Corinthians 13 and definitions of love, such as love is that which enables choice, et cetera, and so forth. And now the explanation of this, as Christ also hath loved us and given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling savor. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be named once among you, as becometh saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. For this ye know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things cometh the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. Be not therefore partakers with them. Okay. What are we going to do now? Here's what we're going to do now. I want you to think about some of these do's and don'ts. And I want to get into the mental exercise. Here's what I want all of us to be able to do on the fly. When we think about societal things, like what happens in society, I want to create an imaginary world with you. And I want you to think why this group would do it. So imagine you have, you're suddenly on a deserted island. It's you and a small number of other people. Could be 10, could be 50, could be 100, right? And you're basically have nothing. You may as well be naked or basically nothing. You don't remember anything except you know your name and you can talk. It's about it. That's all you know. You don't have any rules. You don't have any Bible. You don't have any dictum from on high. You don't have any divine ethic telling you what to do. You don't even know how humans exist or why. You don't know how reproduction works. You don't know anything. You just basically know how to talk and you know your name. And there you are, and there's 99 other people. In such a situation, if you had to build society from scratch, how would you do it? In my opinion, this is a good thought exercise to explain economics to somebody. It's a good thought exercise to explain government to somebody. And the smaller your numbers, like if you instead of 100 people say it's 10, it's easier to grasp concepts of economics when you think about small numbers and how people have to work together and partner together and have to be able to exchange skill sets and the productivity from their skill sets and things like that in order to help each other out. And you can imagine how that might extend out to somebody beyond in the next village, that kind of thing. In Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory, one of the issues is sanctity and degradation, and it's formed really on a divine ethic. And a lot of Christians, we have a lot of divine ethic things. In other words, we do things because God said to do them, and we don't do things because God said not to do them, right? So in this passage, we don't want to fornicate or be unclean or be covetousness. Why? God's telling us that thing, but why? Imagine and I'm not trying to advocate for atheism, but imagine there is no God, right? And there is no divine ethic, and we are making up rules for how to behave in a civil society. Why? So don't say, well, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. I don't like that attitude personally. I want to get to the wisdom of why. Why would God say this? And if we were building up a society from scratch and had no guidance, but we're trying to find, discover, and implement wisdom, how would we make the rules and why? Does that make sense? Anybody?
Yes.
You're kind of putting yourself in the shoes of God in a sense. And I think one of the things that would emerge, and I like to put on an evolutionary thinking cap every once in a while. Imagine, I don't know, creation isn't true. We did all evolve. I just put it on as a thinking cap just for shiggles. So if you have a scenario like that, eventually, say you have 100 people and you all agree about how you should behave. Somebody starts making rules, and then maybe people vote on what the rules are going to be, something like that. What would emerge, in my opinion, in such a situation is the salience. What would be very salient is the absolute arbitrariness of the rules. If these rules, they're not foundational to reality, we just made them up. We just decided these things. Why can't we decide different rules? And because of that, you would have people not taking the rules seriously. So then you might have to come up with another reason to take the rules. So what you might do is, if, say, you're a little wiser than somebody else, you can foresee out into the future. Well, if you do it your way, you're going to wind up hurting yourself in the long run. That's not an iterable game to just hang out in the sugarcane patch all the time and just eat sugar all the time. May feel good to you right now, but that's not a good idea. And I can tell you why, but if you're not going to believe me, so maybe when that doesn't work, when the wisdom of those who have more sagacity is not accepted by those who have less, maybe you come up with you personify the wisdom. I can see into the future, and the future is going to do this, this, and this. So now I'm gonna label that. I'm gonna call that God. I'm gonna say God says not to do this, and maybe that's easier for some people to grasp. And then you can play on their superstitions and intuitions and fears. You could manipulate them. You could use this for good or for bad. I want to think about this. Anybody have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have really kind of two different thoughts. There's one in verse 5 about why. It says, for you know. So that's one thought. Like the reason for, you understand something. But then on the other thought is, I'm thinking of farmers and carpenters. People who know how to grow food would be really helpful. Okay.
Yep.
And then carpenters would be really helpful, because when the winter comes, if there's cold and snow or rain, even, a carpenter maybe building a shelter would be really helpful for everybody. And the carpenters and the farmers might work out a deal, like, you build a house for me and I'll let you have some of the food I'm growing.
Yes.
And I think also there's a need to look into the future, because food will grow during summer, but maybe not during winter. So you can make a deal, and there's trust. Like, people will trust the farmer during the winter to provide them with food. Well, so there has to be trust for a group of people to succeed. I think of what the Bible says, can two walk together except they be agreed?
Is that Amos 3:3?
Yeah. And if I don't trust the farmer, so I say, I'm not going to build a house for you until after I get my food. And if the farmer says, well, I'm not going to give you any food till after you build me a house, then
nothing happens.
Exactly. So there has to be some element of trust. And I think you could, depending on how you interpret it, imply that the agreement of two walking together implies trust, some level.
So let's let's de-religiousize verse 5 then. Let's take what you just said. You have a farmer and a carpenter, and the carpenter can build a house. Now, when I say inheritance of the kingdom of Christ and of God, this is kind of metaphysical. It's not something that we can, I don't know what I can't show you the kingdom of Christ and of God. I can't open up my hands and show you that. See? So let's replace that with something that isn't so intangible. Let's say that having a house and having food, let's replace this phrase with that. Okay. For this, you know that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has a house that's fully built with plenty of food. And you could really think of anything good that you might put there that one may have to strive for it. And I'm thinking of temporal things in this life rather than outsourcing it to the next life. And so if you were to take agreement, if you don't have agreement and ethics, you're not going to have food in a house. You have to abide by a certain thing in order to have both of these things, in order to have this good thing that we're both striving for. We all want food in the house, and you can't get it if you don't do these things. Does that make sense?
I think that's what I was thinking too, that in that verse you could compare it to the guy who's not going to do anything for anybody else till after they do it for him, and he's not trusting, he's not cooperating.
This is interesting. Jordan Peterson brings up something interesting about I see some of the comments now. They're so ridiculous. Jordan Peterson says something about the trustworthiness of a society, and he uses eBay as an example. And when eBay started up, all the economists and moralists and governmentalists and people, they thought that people would write bad checks and then nobody would send any stuff, and it would be this system of low trust that wouldn't work because the trust would break down. And then surprisingly, it turned out that did not happen, but it wound up being a system of high trust where it actually does work. People do send the money, people do send the stuff. And so it's interesting. This guy in the comments, aletheia, which ironically is the Greek word for truth, which is odd for a person who can't seem to get a hold of truth. He keeps asking this question in the chat section: what church are you a pastor of? What church are you a pastor of? And what he's trying to do, no matter what the answer is, there's going to be something wrong with it that he's going to point to next. See, if he has a thought, if there's some kind of conclusion, just come out and say the conclusion. But he's not doing that. He's trying to ask leading questions to get to a certain thing. And the story of where everything has happened, where I've been, it's all over the channel. It's not hidden. It's all over the channel. But since somebody's approaching in bad faith and in a rivalrous dynamic, we're going to toy with them a little bit. No rule omega for you. All right. Any other thoughts on this concept of these rules, these guidances and directions in Ephesians 5?
I have another thought. It seems to me that there is an underlying reason or rationale for rules, God's, even in the Old Testament laws, when Jesus talked about, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets, the two commandments to love God and love your neighbor. So I think that even God is rational, and he's not totally arbitrary. So he does things for a reason. And in fact, I heard, so that's it.
Yeah. So what I want us to do is instead of just saying, well, thus saith the Lord, and we just trust him and that's why we do it, I think there's a wisdom behind what God says, and we try to find what it is. I'm not so keen on some of them. Some of them are just plain post hoc rationalization. For some reason, for example, people will say, God told them not to eat pork because they would get trichinosis because they couldn't cook it well. They could burn things back then too. They had ovens that would kill people. They could cook anything how they wanted it to. I don't think that's the reason for it. I don't think they're avoiding disease. I don't think that's the reason pigs were claimed to be unclean, and shellfish and that kind of thing. And I'm not and the reasoning there probably has something more to do with a peculiar people more so than a baseline practicality of any society. So somebody said, the Reformed Calvinists said Maslow's hierarchy of needs would need to apply on the island. Yes. And then the people would have to bring up the wisdom to develop that hierarchy of needs, because it might not be obvious to people of what that hierarchy of needs is. They would have to develop that on the fly. And then they may also have to have the skill set of knowing how to develop things that need to be developed like that, which would be like a meta thing. So come now, reason together. Chris says, come now, let us reason together. That comes out of Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, where you come and reason together about certain things.
When you were first, introducing, being put on this island or whatever, and you don't have a whole lot of information.
Right.
It's almost like you were, I'm just going in my mind. I'm thinking, well, that's actually kind of like when you're born.
Yeah.
When you're born, you have no idea, right? But you'll see where I'm going with this. You have no idea what's in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. When you're a child, you're in a family and you can be in all different situations. And so you really are almost in life introduced what you just said, but just in a different kind of matrix. Okay, so
yeah, the real difference is that there's more people and some of them have been here longer.
Yeah, but here's what's really interesting, and this is me just out of experience when I was being raised, right? So say when you're 2 years old, right? We'll say between 2 and 3 years old. You still don't have a whole lot of information.
Yeah.
Now, say you're confronted by your parents, right? And you're not taught a whole lot of rules at this age yet. You're kind of watching what's going on. But now you get in a little confrontation with your brother. And then your mom or dad comes to you and says, Billy, did you do this? And if I respond and say I did do it, I knew I did it, but I go, I didn't do it. This is what's fascinating. I know in me that I just lied, and no one ever introduced me to truth. Think about that. So, meaning I know that if I, respond and say, no, I didn't do it, but I know, and I'm sure a lot of people can verify what I'm saying is true. What is that telling me that I lied? You getting what I'm trying to say?
Like a conscience kind of thing?
Well, it's more than a conscience. It's almost like God verifying himself. It's like that he exists, and that it's beyond conscience to me. It's almost like there's that part that holds all things together. Jesus holds all things together. And so what I'm trying to say is there is a witness to us even at that stage that is quite amazing. I guess what I'm trying to say is, so does that make any sense? So meaning that's already something to start with, that well, wait a minute, I just lied to my parents or my mother, and yet I know that. So I know it was wrong, is what I'm getting at. I know it was wrong.
You have that feeling of knowing that you need to have something to hide.
Right. And that I lied. I knew I lied, but I wouldn't know how to explain that except I didn't tell the truth. And yet no one ever taught me anything. No one really said anything to me. It's there. It's almost kind of like where Paul talks about man's without excuse.
I'm trying to think of the practical application for that in the absence of any kind of divine guidance, because it's so subjective. And I would presume that that's probably the case for most people, but I wonder if there's like anomalous people out there where you don't know, they like your your narcissists and your psychopaths who don't have that. I don't know.
I have neighbors I think are narcissists, but we won't go there. Never met one until
I think that kind of goes back to whoever was talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because that would shoehorn right in there. And I don't think that they're developed so much as that they emerge, especially in groups. And if people are finding out that you're not telling the truth, that really affects the group as a whole. And I think that those psychological needs will start surfacing and the group would start dealing with it. Because it self-polices to a large extent. And if you're on some desert island somewhere and there's a small group and you've got to survive, then rules have to be established to some degree in order for rescue or to save yourself or to survive or whatever. So I think that would just naturally take care of itself until they started dividing up into little tribes.
So, yeah. While you're saying that, Roberta, the thing that pops into my mind is the show The Walking Dead. Anybody ever watch The Walking Dead?
I tried.
For those who didn't, it comes across, it starts off as like a zombie apocalypse show, but really, and of course, nobody wants to get bitten by the zombies, but the real issue is all the different factions of humans. That's where the real danger is. And the humans are all broken down into different factions, and every group seems to have its own set of rules. And they're all different. And some of them are very tyrannical and ruthless and savage. And some of them are attempting to be more moral. But there's no unifying narrative behind which all the people can get, because they've all been separated by this disease which has wiped out so many people.
Joe mentioned trust, right? Joe,
Yeah.
He mentioned trust.
Yep.
And I think that's a big element, right? Because if you trust, you have to trust people that won't lie to you. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you have to have trust in a group.
Yep.
And I would think you could go overboard, like, you don't want to trust somebody that you ought not. I mean, what I'm thinking about is somebody that has lied to you and stabbed you in the back 500 times. I mean, you can still love them, but you may not want to trust them in certain areas. You know what I mean? It's like it's a concept that I think you can take to one extreme or to an opposite extreme. Anyway.
Are you talking about trying to, like, an idealistic sort of thing where people are trying to be good, or are you talking about what people would do if they had the opportunity? I'm sorry, just in a general, this scenario that we're putting together here, is that the goal, is to find out what if people were trying to make things right? Or because we have laws, right? And they try to legislate morality with laws as it is, and that's kind of shows us what would happen. They favor one group until that group takes over, and then that group makes laws that favor themselves until the next group takes over. So
yeah, I think that it could be that, but kind of what I'm getting at is, why does God say what he says? Why? And I think we take it for granted too much, is that, okay, if God said it, I will just do it, lean not to your own understanding. but surely there's got to be a reason why God is saying what he's saying.
Sure.
Why would he say such a thing? And if you had a sufficiently wise civilization, would they also say the same thing? So would they converge upon the same conclusions? So let's say that instead of just having 100 random people, maybe you have you have no infrastructure at all, but you suddenly have like people like John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachenberger and Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and Gandhi. I don't know. You just have a bunch of people that seem like they're earnestly interested in something that is true, even though they don't have a unifying metaphysics, if you will. And you put but they're all interested in wisdom, right? So you put them all, and maybe they can retain all of their knowledge too. But tell them everybody else in the world is dead. Now you're on a remote planet. It's just 100 of you guys and gals. Say it's like 50-50. What do you do? That kind of thing. And it may be the thought experiment. You could do it with children. 100 children. What kind of society would they build? 100 random people. What would they build? 100 people who you might find talking on the Stoa. What kind of society would they build? The morality of the strongest would prevail in some cases. It depends on who.
Isn't that what really happened, though? I mean, when the world started to be populated, it was populated pretty much by random people that established these.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it did not go well.
And so what you have in the book of Genesis is a series of falls. Some people say the fall. And I can't remember who pointed this out, whether it was Michael Heiser or maybe it was Jordan Peterson. But one of them talks about it's not just the fall, it's a series of falls. So if you think you have Adam and Eve and they eat the fruit, right? That's a fall. You have, and maybe somebody would say that Lucifer falling before that happened would be a fall, even though you don't find out about it till later, like Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 and stuff like that. So, and then you have Cain and Abel. You have the first murder. That's definitely a fall. And then you have the world. The entire world gets so bad that it has to be flooded. That's a fall. And then you have misguided ambitions, Tower of Babel. That's a fall. So one way you could look at the book of Genesis is as a series of falls, not just one fall, but a series of them. And I would suspect that any such new society would have a similar thing happening to it.
I really like what you were saying there, Kevin, about that God has a reason and trying to understand what that reason is. You probably heard me say this before, but Moses knew God's ways and the children of Israel knew God's deeds. So it sounds to me like Moses probably had a deeper understanding, like you're talking about, of why God does things. And
I'm thinking about that. Because I just got through listening to a 7-part series on Idol Killer show on the penal substitutionary atonement. And this is not the first place that I've heard this, but the idea of some of the Old Testament laws as God meeting them where they were, not being dictums and mandates that God needed for him to be pleased, but because of where they came from out of Egypt, there needed to be some kind of meeting the people where they were with all these sacrifices and laws. I haven't really made up my mind on that. I do think it's interesting to think about, but that's kind of what my mind goes to when you say that. Like, there's a lot of things that have to be done. Have you ever read the stuff on how to determine whether or not somebody has leprosy? I don't know why you would say any of that stuff. I'm not, unless there were miracles built in or just something we don't understand. There's some weird stuff in there.
And another thought on the not understanding why to do something and just following rules blindly. If you have 10 people, 100 people, doing that, and maybe somebody, whoever made the law or the rule or the policy that was really good and worked for that situation, for that context, what if the environment changes and they're lost, probably. But but if they know the reason for it, then they can adapt.
Yeah, if you know the reason, you can recreate it and then adapt. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what I want to get at here today. That's what I want to emerge. I can't remember who I heard this from either. I didn't come up with this myself, but somebody pointed out that Jethro, which was Moses's father-in-law, not the guy from Beverly Hillbillies, he says he sees Moses getting weary making all these judgments. Everybody's coming to Moses with their problems, and he's assessing every problem individually. Okay. And it could be that a lot of the laws that come out are essentially the FAQ of the most frequent things, the frequently asked questions of, like, I'm constantly getting these people who have an ox stolen and you have to repay them 4 oxen in return. So that's just like a thing. We're just going to make that a standard. That happens all the time. I hear that 4 times a day. So we're going to make that a standard. It's like a frequently asked questions database. And the job that I work for, we're trying to remediate a particular vulnerability. And we created an FAQ because as we're having different conversations with different stakeholders, we keep getting asked the same questions all the time. Wonder how much of that kind of shows up as well. Yeah. All right. Now, say why would God, you have 100 people on the island and they don't know anything except they can speak and they know their name. Some of the men and some of the women become attracted to each other and they run off in the bushes, and when they come back, turns out they find out how humans are made. So now a few months have passed, maybe a year has passed, and some people have had babies and they've figured out what's causing it. And then some of those babies, I mean, think about, there's no rules. So maybe some of the dudes are running off in the bushes with everybody they can, and then nobody's sticking around and helping raising the kids, right? Maybe that's happening. I don't know. I'm going to tell you another scenario too. This is very interesting. There are some hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist to this day where it is normal for all the men to get with all the women, and the women get pregnant and have babies, and nobody knows who the dads are. But the whole village works together to raise all the kids. They know who the mothers are, but even that to a certain point doesn't really matter because all the adults are working together, raising all the kids together. So it's like a village level effort, and there is no marriage as we think of it. It's not like that. They just operate in a different way. So what would stop them from doing something like that? I don't know. And could it be that the invention of agricultural society like the plow is really what drove these things? And this is a thought that I think about. If I put my head in a secular mindset, here's what I'd be tempted to think: that during the development of humankind in hunter-gatherer societies with matriarchal goddesses and societal structures, the plow gets invented and it changes everything. So now women can't push the plow because when they're pregnant, they miscarry their babies. And we don't want that because we need more kids to push the plows and more kids to have kids and more kids to do all the things. And so now we can create a caloric surplus because we know how to farm the field and grow grain now instead of just picking berries and killing buffalo. And so everything changes. Now the land becomes important. Then the inheritance becomes important. That starts getting passed down to the men. All the gods start becoming masculine gods. And so if I was it completely would reshape how society works. And then your heir, your sons, you have this inheritance concept starts getting passed down. The way families are structured starts to happen in that way. And then if you would really start to value paternal certainty, that would become very important to you because of these reasons, because of inheritance and because of other things. So given that idea, if I was completely secular in my mind, I might think that the plow is really what changed us into a patriarchal society. And then everything that we find in the Bible is post hoc rationalizations for how you should behave in such a society, presuming there is a God telling us to live this way. No,
it sounds like one messed up society, right? I mean, it could go in so many destructive, right? That kind of society can go in so many destructive ways. It sounds like. I mean, you could have 1,000 different scenarios.
Which society?
The one that you're talking about, like right there with the
the society A, or after the plow, before or after the plow changed everything?
Well, both actually. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like you always hit like the automobile. You got something right now like the automobile. The automobile came in and it changed society. In what way did it change society? I guess the way I'm just thinking is, and understanding what you're saying is, it's almost like you could have 100 different scenarios and they're all going to end up kind of doing the same thing. It's kind of like Ron was saying, you can legislate laws, but still though, you're going to have people without God it's just going to run awry no matter which way you go. You might have great rules and you're going to, but what was coming to my mind when you were talking about this, and when I was telling you my little example, if you could pull up Romans 2:15 or Romans 2:14, it's pretty fascinating, and maybe you can elaborate on that, because it's to me it's pretty self-explanatory. Romans 2:14.
So this is very interesting. I brought this up when we were talking about our video on why we should not argue with free will as an axiom of our argument. A recent video, I brought this up. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves. So, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing them witness, rather their thoughts, the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. If you were to, an example of this, if you go to Abimelech with Abraham, Abraham lied about his wife. He said she was his sister. And Abimelech at least had enough decency to not take somebody else's wife, I guess. Or, and then so he starts to take Sarah. And then, God has a dream. And then God finds, if you go to, let me show this too, because this is important, because Calvinists won't believe it. This pagan god, Genesis 20 verse 6. Nope, that's not where I want to go. Oh no. I don't know what just happened. I really want to pick the big undo button. But I just lost.
Chapter 20 of Genesis.
Genesis 20 verse 6. All my resources just went away. Where is Tanner Thetford when I need him to tell me how to not do this again? So, and God,
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Said he not to me, she is my sister, and she even herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, yea, I know that thou did this in the integrity of thine heart. Well, there goes, how could this pagan king who worships a false god have integrity in his heart? Where is total depravity? For I also withheld from thee from sinning against me, therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee. And I mean, if I was that guy, I'd be like, what kind of people are you picking for prophets these days? I'm going to close that program down and see if I can get it to come back like I had it. I don't know what I did. Do not synchronize. All right. Who else? Comments. So Abimelech. I think we were talking, you wanted to bring up Romans 2:14 and 15. I think that's a fairly good example of that.
It really is. Yeah. It just goes to show you that there's because you were just mentioning, you got this secular world that thinks that everybody's, and there is a lot of misrepresentation in the biblical world, ideologies going on all the time. But when you go to God's word, which you're always doing when you're, confronting Calvinism, it's kind of like your zero line, which I thought your last one you did was really great about.
You like my game A stuff, huh?
Yeah, the free will thing, which is true, but when you start comparing the scriptures like you're doing right now, it's like it's mind blowing. It's just, to me, it's just mind blowing how God can write the law it's in people's hearts, and they don't know it, or they do know it, and it's there. It's just there. It's just like that line when you're a little kid, you just, where did that come from? He holds all things together.
Yeah, I'm thinking that
Go ahead, Joe.
That God has given to every man a measure of faith. There's a scripture that says that.
Romans 12:3 says that.
Yeah, so that's, again, apparently even what Christians might consider non-Christians, still God has given them something like a conscience or faith or something there.
I'm looking for that passage in Romans 1 where it says, holding the truth in unrighteousness. Somebody help me find that.
Like verse 18 or 19.
Who hold the truth of God in unrighteousness.
18 or 19.
Yeah, it's right there in verse 18, I think. Y'all seeing the screen?
Yes.
I don't have my other Bibles up anymore. Well, maybe I do over here. But I'm look at the ESV, because I think some of the new versions say suppressing the truth, which is interesting to me, because I used to, being a big King James guy, I used to argue against these other versions. But I think there's a little bit of signal here too. It's like hold it like holding it back, in a sense, suppressing it. Like an ideology would suppress the truth. Like there's a truth that wants to be spoken through you, and you shut it down and you suppress the truth. There's a truth that wants to flow through you. And remember, when we say truth, we're talking about correspondence with reality, not just a bunch of propositional statements that aren't wrong. So why? Any other thoughts on that before I start asking other questions?
Well, in verse 18, they hold the truth or they suppress the truth. Either way, that it seems like they recognize truth somehow.
Yeah, I think the whole exercise is sort of revealing, because that person in the chat mentioned Maslow's hierarchy, and it's like,
yeah,
it's kind of like when we strip out, like just in a thought exercise, just strip out all of our access to our propositional beliefs about things. And like, so we don't have the Bible, we don't have any kind of, access to ideological systems or thinking or anything like that. We're just in this imaginary way plopped in a scenario where all we have is our participatory knowing with the situation, a perspective within our body, and the ability to do things. And it's kind of like, it's kind of unnerving to go through that thought exercise, and then see that if you're honest with like how you would proceed forward, that it's like, well, I think I'm just imagining the history of the world. I think I'm just imagining like the history of humanity, and there's this point somewhere along our history where Maslow's hierarchy kind of gets inverted, and the most important things, the first things become the transcendent things. And it's like, what transcendent beliefs and propositional assertions do I need to subscribe to first as the first need? Like, think about how many Christians you come across where they prioritize in a virtue signaling kind of way. Oh, well, all I really care about is whether a person's going to hell or whether they're saved. Like that's the number one thing for them. When it's like, that's an inversion of Maslow's hierarchy.
That's correct.
And so when we enter into a thought exercise that puts that hierarchy into proper alignment, which is, what's the most important thing? My participatory physical being within the world, and then build up from there. When you actually walk through the steps of that, all you see is the history of Western civilization. And you know, but then we start talking, like, we start feeling uncomfortable when we say, hey, let's imagine, you know, if I have myself in a secular mind, well, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? As if there's a mind, that there's a secular mind, and there's a religious mind, or a mind that's like in attunement with or using the Bible or the Word of God in a separate way, as if they're two totally different things.
Like there's a different truth for different people.
Right. Like that. So you see, like, the schism right there is kind of like super dualistic and doesn't really comport with reality in any way. It's just a metaphysical, transcendent kind of assertion about, well, there's the secular world and the secular mind, and then there's this transcendent and higher mind or wisdom of God or something like that I have. And that doesn't overlap with the, like, your actual participatory experience in the world. It's like you have to choose between two ideological systems of either a secular mind and the way that the secularists think, or the way the Christians think. And it's like, why are we arguing about these metaphysical systems and belief systems that they don't touch the ground of the thought experiment, which is, what do you do if you don't have these things? Oh, you actually just you work in order to, you know, survive or thrive with the human beings next to you. So I think that the thought exercise, basically what I'm trying to say is, it exposes the high-mindedness that we are in modern society, and especially in modern Christian society, where we have completely taken ourselves out of the participatory, like, basic needs of our lives. Like, we're living right in another world, and we just won't admit it.
That the things that we experience when we breathe and touch things and walk around, the grass under your feet, there are certain basic things in life. And it's almost like we have belief systems that, instead of getting us in touch with what's real, they insulate us from what's real.
Exactly. Like, so what we'll do is we'll start to parse out and divide, like, a particular building or a particular physical structure as either a secular building or a godly building. And it's like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous.
Building.
So
but seriously, we really think that way sometimes, where we think some things are like transcendent and holy in a physical sense, and some things are dirty and, like, you know, secular in some way. And it's all because of the governing belief sets that we're lending primacy to.
I mean, that brings up the big question of what is uncleanness in verse 3. So let's ask a question. We have some things to do, walk in love, and we have the example of Christ giving himself for us. And then we have some things to not do. We don't want these things to be named once among us, right? So why no fornication? Everybody know what fornication is?
It's like 12 different things.
It's kind of an umbrella term.
Yeah.
If you look in the new Bibles, they usually have the phrase sexual immorality there, but what does that mean too?
It could be spiritual fornication. You know?
Right. So if you look it up in a lexicon, you'll get a lot of the idolatry, stuff like that. Mm-hmm.
Or porneia, right? That's the Greek word for.
Yep. Porneo, yep.
But how would be, two people having a relationship, not married, be synonymous with someone having sex with an animal, or sex with a sister, or sex with?
That's a great question. Because if you look it up in Webster's 1828, you get adultery and incest.
Yeah.
And then and then bestiality is also considered.
Well, different things are different, right?
Yeah, those seem very different to me.
Mm-hmm.
So why would so I'm looking in the ESV, just I'll show you so you can see it. Figured out how to restore my stuff, by the way. Where the King James says fornication, uncleanness, and covetousness, the ESV says sexual immorality and impurity or covetousness. So what constitutes sexual immorality, and why would it be forbidden? Why would there be a divine ethic? What's the wisdom behind directing people not to have fornication? And so somebody said against the nature of God. So we're trying to not attribute things to thus saith God because it offends his nature. There's got to be a wisdom to it that affects us. What is that? What is that?
You said it when you were talking about I don't think you used the word pygmies, but people in a society that's having sex with all these women and they don't know whose child she is. Right? Now think about this. So,
I try to word things like that so carefully.
Oh, hopefully I didn't. Hopefully I said it clear, but maybe I messed up.
You were clear.
Okay. So I think it's kind of like and hopefully I won't lose my train of thought. It's kind of like, so when we're ambassadors, we claim to be Christian. We read the scriptures. We're representing something. It's okay. So we're representing God. I guess it's like my marriage, right? I mean, if I was to go out and commit fornication, that would totally disrupt and destroy my relationship with my wife.
Okay, so let's pause right there. You're between the tribe where everybody's getting with everybody to the 100 people on an island to today. What makes you married?
What makes me married? Trust and commitment. And not only it's more than trust and commitment. It's kind of like there's order. There's order to a marriage. In order for a marriage to prosper and truly and grow and build and build into what am I trying to say? It's not going to happen by me going out and having an adulterous affairs with 30 women, and then my wife finding out, 5 years later. It would literally destroy every foundation of good that was there. So I mean, so if we're if God is good, which He says He's all good, everything has to build off that, and for it to be in harmony, to work.
Build off what?
Off His truth, off Him. Because we see the laws written on the hearts of men, and if we don't have that, we're going to have chaos. And not only that, I mean, it's again, if I was to trust you and then you're to go out and stab me behind my back, how can we move forward in a society and have, where, you can say I can leave my door unlocked. You couldn't do it, so these laws of God are there for actually freedom. I mean, because there's no freedom in locking your doors. There's no freedom in not trusting somebody. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, though, back to the fornication thing, because that's what we're talking about. If it's kind of like even when you read in the book of Revelations about the kings, committed fornication with, the great harlot, Mystery Babylon. I mean, how do they commit fornication, with this Mystery Babylon? It's fornication to me is a very disruptive, untrustworthy thing. And you could tie it to sex. You could tie it to spiritual connections that have nothing to do with sex. And what it really ends up to be is we end up fornicating against it's kind of like, isn't there a Bible scripture that talks about if you lie with a harlot, you bring Jesus involved?
I think there's a place where it says if you get with a harlot, you sin against your own body.
And then you about the Holy Spirit. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we can fornicate to God. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm kind of getting off track, but I believe that this fornication thing is there. If you don't fornicate, and you don't want to fornicate. I mean, I don't want to fornicate in my marriage of 43 years. It does come into my mind. I just don't want to. It's not there, because I know that there's just that connection. You know what I mean? There's a connection there that is so strong and so good, and it's good for me. So when people fornicate, it's disruptive and destructive.
Could I try and expand on what I think Billy's saying? Oh no, Anthony, go ahead. My bad, man.
So this kind of reminds me of one of your videos, Kevin, that you talking about gay marriage. Yeah. And like you were talking about like how Christians has like kind of gave marriage to the state, and the state is telling us what we should and what we should not do. And kind of like, yeah, like that whole conversation, I thought that was the most like interesting conversation about a little bit what Billy was saying. Kind of touches on that a little bit. Yeah. Of the whole fornication and marriage and like what constitutes as us being married. Like, yeah, so like I thought that conversation was like from that video that you made was really interesting.
So you got 100 people on an island. Why do we collectively come up with the wisdom? We have no evidence of God or whatever. We don't have any Bible, nothing like that. So, but we somehow generate the wisdom to make the rule no fornication. Why do we make this rule?
Maybe because of jealousy and strife resulting from not having that rule, and black eyes, resulting therefrom. Maybe.
You're saying black eyes, like people getting in fight and getting hit in the eye?
Right.
Okay.
Maybe. They're saying hell hath no fury like well, the saying
woman scorned.
Woman, but it could go the other way. I guess a man scorned could get upset too.
Well, what if you have a society where there is no jealousy?
Yeah, well,
would different rules be okay for them?
Who knows? Is that possible anywhere besides the planet Vulcan?
So I think one of the things that this is really gets to is the reality of the fact of children. And there's only one way to get a child, and that's through the body of a female. It's only one way to do that. And I know there's like scientific ways you can grow one in a test tube, but basically, there's only one way to get a human being, and that is through a woman. Well, that's a lot of risk. for her to bear by herself. And so it could be that a bunch of guys, having relations with a woman triggers positive reward circuits in the mind. It feels good. So why wouldn't the guy just get with as many women as he could and not stick around and help raise the kids that are produced as a result? And so I think that you would discover in a society that you got to find some way to stop that. We can't have these guys being jerks and running around. So we need to make it so that only non-jerks who will stick around and follow up on the responsibility and share this risk with the woman are permitted to engage with them in such a way. Does that make sense? How you would come up with this rule?
Yeah. And I thought it was something Billy was saying earlier about like Romans 2:14, something in people's heart. So could there be, if the guys are, fathering a lot of children and then not helping to take care of them, could there be something in their heart that tells them that they need to help take care of the baby?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, so if you listen to the psychologists talk about this, you basically say that the institution of marriage is to make it so that guys who are jerks can't have sex. Basically, it's a preventative measure. And then the invention of birth control, or I guess not the invention of, but the improvement of birth control starting right around the 1960s and moving forward, changes it to where there is a lot less risk for the woman with regard to childbirth if that's the way she wants it, which reopens the door for men to be jerks and still have sex, because now they've both assured that there's not going to be any responsibility for anybody to share. So then it kind of changes the dynamic. And so if somebody were creating rules from scratch after contraceptives, would they be the same? I'm just asking a question. I'm trying to get us to think. I mean, we want to be able to engage in the world. We want to engage in a world where people are confused about what gender terminology means, and there's not agreement on that. We have to be able to think through the wisdom of these kinds of things at their most basic and fundamental level, and have conversations at the most basic and fundamental level without necessarily resorting to a source of wisdom or authority that the other person does not see as wise or authoritative. Okay, so if I'm talking to a secular person who is they have no need for God, no belief in God, if I invoke God on why something should be a certain way, it's not going to go over with them. So we need to be able to speak to people in terms of wisdom that they can agree to, that they will understand the reason for it. Are we following me?
Yeah, I don't know if verse 5 extends back to verse 3, but if it does, it seems like it's a lot more serious than that, because if you do this, you're going to lose your inheritance in heaven. He's talking to Christians. He's not talking to the unsaved here. And if you engage in this, sounds to me like a promise. You're going to lose your inheritance. That doesn't mean you're going to lose your salvation, but you're going to lose a lot of good stuff in the afterlife, it sounds like. Whatever that inheritance is, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about. But under the axioms that the Bible is true and it came from God, et cetera, and so forth, I completely agree with what you just said. If I'm trying to talk to somebody in a secular society who does not see the Bible as authoritative or wise or any way, that's not going to fly.
Right. But I thought you were trying to get back to why would that be an edict? And my point was that it must be really, really serious.
Well,
Right.
So could be for that, but also like Billy was pointing out earlier, even the Gentiles which have not the law do the things that are contained in the law. In godless societies, they have rules against fornication and adultery too.
Right.
So what's the wisdom behind that? Why do they have that rule when they are not invoking God to come up with that rule?
I think Billy was getting at something that was really, really, as far as I can see, the most important part of the fornication thing. And he did it through a bodily movement of like this. He kept saying like that it would disrupt the connection that I have with my wife, which is to say, in some sense, that in the act of, when these humans go into the bushes and figure out what sex is and how to make babies, that this is some kind of profound, like, participatory experience of connectedness with another person.
Mm-hmm.
And that once that mating is fitted and consummated or executed, then, like, in my 100 people on this island mind, I'm thinking that I'm like putting myself into this person, like literally, and then like more of me is coming out of them, which so there's this really, really, really basic and fundamental connection that is at the very limits of my language, at least, that's going phenomenologically going on there. And so the fornication, to use Billy's hand motion, is something like an improper participatory commitment or coupling to something that's like not right. It's not that thing. Not to objectify.
I mean, when you say improper, it kind of makes me think of sacred and profane, because we want to be aiming at something. And I'm not saying sacred and profane in a religious sense. I'm saying it in the sense of understanding what is best for the outcome of all the people involved. And you aim at that.
This is exactly where my mind was going with the fornication thing, with that illustration there, was that, and ultimately what this ends up being is a profanity. It's an improper pointer, and like we could, like, I don't want to get like vulgar or anything, but it's an improper placement of the pointer into the wrong thing, which is profanity. It's aimed at and shooting at the wrong target, which is disorientation. It's profane. And to go back to what what I heard him saying was that it's actually a betrayal and a foregoing of the, probably, as far as I can see, the deepest, most fundamental thread line or aspect of this particular little community that we've been talking about, which is the ability to communicate and or relate and couple yourself to another person through, fundamentally, most basically through dialogue, through communication, and how the creative impulse, but at its most basic and at its most prevalent and most primordial is just communication with words. And we see how, like, I don't want to take too much time, but basically the thought exercise that we've been doing is exactly the thought exercise that Plato is going through in his book, The Republic, which, in a secular mind, that is the Bible, that is the pillar of which modern civilization rests on, that and the Bible. But what Plato is doing in The Republic is it's fundamentally him imagining a dialogue between Socrates and, at a certain point, a man named Glaucon. And they're talking about what all of the things that we're talking about right now. They jettison a little bit of like the basic primordial needs, and they get right to the more political and like civilized world stuff, but they're having the same conversation. And from that Socratic conversation emerged Western culture and Western civilization. So it was through the coupling of a dialogue, a participatory knowing through communication, that these creative ideas of civilization emerged out of. And the sexual intercourse thing is the most bodily like manifestation of this process, which is why the fornication notion is in our little culture is probably one of the greatest threats to the flourishing and sustainability to this, little group of people that we have, because it cuts off that, it betrays fundamentally that coupling at a physical level. It betrays it because it's improperly placed, and in a betrayal of the relational commitments that you have already made. If that's too much to hold and too much to think about, I'm sorry.
Well, I was thinking maybe along those lines, what Billy said earlier about their God's relationship, not just two people, a relationship like a marriage, but God's relation to Israel in the Old Testament. It seems like that same type of analogy, like a marriage in Israel was described as going after other gods or idols with that same analogy, like, so that's it.
And then there's Hosea.
And Solomon, he messed up with, building altars to false gods, right? For his wives, or one of them.
And the common element that I see between God's relationship with Israel and between two people in a marriage is the concept of betrayal and jealousy. God is a jealous God. So those are some common aspects.
And then the marriage in Revelations, the marriage, right, of the Lamb. Is it the Lamb? Nick, you said a lot in there. You really did. And what's amazing is you mentioned communication, and this is what's always blown my mind, is that Jesus never had sex with any women here on this earth, right? And so right?
He had died.
According to the narrative of Jesus that we subscribe to.
Yeah, I know the other ones. Yeah, I've heard that before, but
the Jesus seminar has a different thing to say about it.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily buy into that, but I'm just saying now, for God to come down and not have sex, I mean, the way I understand the scriptures, pure, and just think the communication part where Nick was saying communication, there's something there, that fornication just isn't sex. I mean, it is, but it's also a betrayal and a dismembering of your connection with God in different spiritual aspects. You have people in music that worship, in my opinion, they're fornicating with different ideologies. We talk about ideologies that are all these compartmentalized different little thoughts, and belief systems that are all compartmentalized. And there's a lot of fornication going with all these ideologies, and so, I mean, that fornication really covers a lot of ground, it's just not physical, but I think we can relate it in other aspects. I don't know.
Well, so much to think about here.
There's a lot there.
What about people talking about betrayal and that kind of thing? What about consensual non-monogamy among people who can't have kids?
So explain. What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
So there's not a betrayal. There's basically people who, in their term for it, who have partners but decide that they don't have to be monogamous with them, and everybody knows.
Oh.
And everybody's in agreement, and it's not hidden. What are we dealing with there?
It's a good question.
So I'm trying to get to the wisdom of when you're going to produce kids, that makes a lot of sense. When you're going to produce possibly STDs, there's risks involved there too. So I want us to think about these things from the generative aspect of why would these things be said, and what do they encompass, and could it be that people are following rules? Yeah, somebody said open marriages. I think that's what some people call them. Could it be that following the rules can sometimes create errors too, and that just following the rules isn't necessarily wisdom? For example, I'm not going to say any names, but I know a young couple right now that's going to get married very soon. Neither person has any business getting married. It's not going to last. And it seems like and I'll just be honest with you, when I was 21, 22, when my wife and I got married at the time, we were of this true love waits mindset kind of thing. And we essentially got married when we did because we thought that was what would make what's the term? I'm trying not to say the S word so much. But it would make such relations acceptable and okay. And then we use the proof text, and with the 1 Corinthians 7, it's better to marry than to burn, and all this kind of stuff. And so that trying to be virtuous along that one aspect actually wound up being disorienting and causing some decisions that got made that were very unwise with regard to very many other aspects, which were not taken into account, at least not very well. And so now the fallout happens, and it's not just my relationship, but there's several surrounding where I think like that kind of thing is what's driving people to get married. And it's almost like they're reduced to their sexuality almost. Paul and I were just talking about this earlier today. It's almost like if you get married to somebody to legitimize having sex with them, it's almost the same thing as somebody else getting married as a gold digger or something else. It's almost transactional. And we start to view sex transactionally rather than relationally. And so even though we thought we were optimizing to do the virtuous thing and follow the rules, we wound up making a lot of other unwise choices because we were optimizing for that one aspect with disregard for many others. So I guess I'm just putting that out there as a thought to, I don't know. I think we foreground this issue so much, maybe too much, that we fail to consider other aspects of relationships and the decisions that people make. And I'm not saying what the right answer is. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that thinking that I was doing the right thing at one point in my life got completely turned on its head at a later point in my life.
Yeah, a proverb comes to mind: can two walk together unless they're agreed? And if there are other aspects, you know, on which the man and the woman disagree, you know, it could be a problem.
Like maybe in hindsight, if you could ensure that both people are not ideologically possessed before they're allowed to get married, maybe that would be a good thing.
Yeah, especially if they're not ideologically possessed in opposite, diametrically opposed ideologies.
Yeah, well, even if they're in the same ideology, it's still a reality bubble, and they're not really relating to each other. They're relating to the proxy of reality with each other as a placeholder. They're relating to an overlay, not the real person. They don't have a relationship with an individual. Mm. They have a relationship with a place filler.
Yeah, and speaking of reality, I had a thought on something. I don't know. That might be changing gears here before you're ready.
Well, I guess we can change gears in a second. I just kind of want to also think along the lines of the thought experiment. I want you to think about people who are in societies where there's no concept of marriage, or where marriage isn't recognized by the state. And I want us to think about what constitutes a marriage. Is it a piece of paper from the state? Another way to look at the piece of paper from the state is that if your relationship falls apart, you are outsourcing to them the disposition of your assets and children. Why would you want to do that? Is that a wise thing to do? I mean, think about that. And so is it a ceremony? Is it a commitment? Is it Isaac taking Rebecca into his tent? What constitutes a marriage? What makes a marriage a marriage? So that's something to think about as well. And there are people in some societies where there is no concept of a marriage. So what would they do with passages like this? Or maybe there's no governmental marriage certificate. Now, I know there's a church that I know of in New Orleans when all the political stuff came down about gay marriage and they started taking political actions against churches that wouldn't perform gay marriages. You had a bunch of activists going around asking churches to perform marriages for them so that they could say no, so that they could bring in the law and get the church shut down. They were doing all this stuff on purpose. And so one church just took the notion, they just took the position, we don't do any marriages. We don't do marriages here at all. That was their way around it. And it turned out, so it's funny because that pastor and his wife were married like 22 years earlier or something like that. And it turns out something happened with their marriage certificate, and there was confusion about who went and turned it in. So they both thought they did the right thing, but didn't find out till like 15 years later that their marriage certificate never got turned in, and they were never married on paper anywhere, but they were living as husband and wife this whole time. Are they fornicating? I don't think so.
I agree. I mean, yeah, I agree. And reason why I say that is, you know, I know we're live, but, you know, I've been married 43 years and I had a relationship with my wife before we legally got married. And in my heart, I made the commitment before, you know, I'm just by myself, hiding away in my closet before God. I says, I'm married to her. This is my wife. And I'm not going to leave her. And that was my commitment before God. I made like a what do you want to say? What's the you know, there's that, you know, connection between you and God. What am I trying to find?
Covenant?
Yes. I made a covenant with God, and I says, this is my wife.
So between me and you, I get that, and I don't have an issue with that. Yeah. But so how many 17-year-olds are going to run with that?
No, I know.
Every Friday night with somebody new.
No. I get it, but still, though, either they're going to be committed or not. They could say all kinds of things and make excuses to do what they want to do, but God knows if you're committed or not, right? That's all I'm trying to say. You can go before God and make a commitment, and He knows if you're like, you know, and I'm just, but so paper doesn't mean anything. I've seen people get married, boom, 2 years later they're gone. And I mean, it's sad. And
yeah, having the paper doesn't matter in a lot of there's couples who don't have a piece of paper and they're together longer than married couples.
Exactly. And that's what I'm just trying to say is it goes beyond paper, and it goes to where the laws are written on the hearts in the Gentiles. It goes deeper. We are born with good and evil. It goes back to Genesis. Everyone, whether you got a society that wants to believe in God or not, we all have the knowledge of this, both good and evil, in our minds. And if we seek good, like Cornelius and Lydia, and if people seek truth, God's not going to reject them. I mean, he doesn't, because, it's kind of like what you sow, so shall you reap. But it goes deeper than that. Paper means nothing. Paper absolutely memes nothing. Laws actually mean nothing in the sense if you're not going to put them in your heart, right? So I mean, but I was just trying to relate because you were just mentioning, that little scenario you were, I just related to that. That's all.
Yeah, they got people in the comments. Some people are saying the public declaration for accountability and fidelity is important. And I get that. There is a societal aspect to marriage. Somebody else said you got to have the ceremony and the tradition. In the Bible, there's a wedding of Cana, but there are no weddings of people that we know in the Bible. Like we don't hear about Peter's wedding, or he has a wife, but we don't know about his wedding. We don't know about any of this stuff. And you got examples like Isaac took Rebekah into his tent. There's no guidance on exactly what constitutes a marriage that comes out very clearly and tells you exactly what it is. It's almost like there's a presumption that whatever is the norm in society is kind of what people are going with the flow with. Now, Joe had some comments you wanted to say. We're over time a little bit, but you want to go ahead and say your thought?
Well, I was debating whether to do that or hold it for next time, maybe. But
well, you could introduce it, and then we could explore it next time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, briefly, Nick was talking about something, and try to say what I was thinking. Like, there's two worlds, a secular world and a spiritual world or a religious world, and the thought was, thinking maybe the philosophical influence of, on Christian culture through Augustine and some others that brought some of those elements in, that God is totally, immutable and not touched with our feelings. And so anyway, kind of unreal in a sense. But like you throw your brains out every Sunday when you go to church and you believe in miracles. Maybe you replace your secular brain with a religious brain, okay? And then, you believe in creation, and then Monday you go to work or school and you swap brains again and believe in evolution. But then on Sunday you don't believe in it. And it's like two different worlds. Really, is it really two different worlds, or is that a false dichotomy? And is there really one reality, that the reality that transcends both and incorporates both the spiritual and the secular, the natural, as well as the supernatural, And one other thought is that actually God is more natural than nature, because you might say God is supernatural, but God, if a city created by man is artificial and not natural because man created it, then God created nature just like man created a city. So if the city is artificial, then nature is artificial in that sense. Yeah. And if what is natural is just not created, then God is the most natural thing in the world. So God is really more natural than nature in a sense. Just some thoughts.
Yeah. So if there really is no such thing as supernatural, there are just natural things that we cannot yet explain.
Right. Like Arthur C. Clarke said, that any thing that we don't understand because it's so technologically advanced seems like magic. And you can throw in the word supernatural there. Yeah. Okay. I guess that's enough for now.
And another way to say that, I guess, would be kind of like metaphysical things that are beyond our ability to test with physics as we understand them. We got a guy in the comments saying that the Bible teaches that Calvinism is true. Actually, the Bible doesn't teach anything. One of the things that we say on this channel, the Bible says things. And whether or not you learn anything from what it says is a completely different matter. But it has content. It doesn't teach unless you learn. And if you learn the wrong thing, it didn't teach you anything. And there's things that you can't learn from the Bible until you've undergone a certain amount of transformation. So I've had fun with this thought experiment of why we're trying to look at the wisdom behind why God would issue the guidance that he issues. And I want us to be able to have sound, non-ideologically possessed conversations with people who hold different views than us in a way where we can approach in good faith and really genuinely be curious and not be trying to convince them what we think is true, but actually maybe supplement our wisdom with theirs and vice versa. Any closing thoughts from anybody before anything you got to get off your chest before we go? And as you're thinking about that, for everybody in this crew, remember we are, we're on the Discord server now. So hopefully we'll be seeing each other there throughout the week. Nothing heard, guys. Peace out. And I'll see you next week. Looking forward
Bye.
to seeing you.